Hi, fifth graders. Welcome to lesson 2C, part 1 of our Matter and Energy in an Ecosystem unit. Today we are focusing on balanced ecosystems. And you are going to see that after watching my video, you are going to listen to some of Mrs. Grainier's recordings of an informational text, answer some questions, and then you get to explore this ecology lab simulator, which is super cool, and answer this data chart that goes along with it. I think you're really going to enjoy playing around with that simulator and seeing what happens in an ecosystem when you add different factors. So first things first, you're going to click on the slides for today. And when you click on the slides, you will see this. Here are our learning targets for today. It says, what does it mean for an ecosystem to be balanced? So what does that mean when we say balanced ecosystem? What factors can lead to an ecosystem becoming unbalanced? So maybe abiotic factors, biotic factors. Those are some things that we're going to learn about today as well. What happens when an ecosystem is not balanced? Why is it important for an ecosystem to be balanced? What are the effects of it not being balanced? And how do different species affect the balance of an ecosystem? So how do different plants and animals affect the balance? Can we affect the balance? These are all questions that we're going to be investigating and answering today throughout our lesson. The first thing that you're going to do is click on the links to the pages that Mrs. Grainier has recorded. It's an informational text called What About Change? And it discusses the balance of an ecosystem and what happens when these changes are made in an ecosystem. So whenever you see reading pages 4 through 9, 10 through 15, and so on, you're going to click on the heading and you will see that it brings up a link to a Loom recording of Mrs. Grainier reading the text to you. So you are going to watch these short clips of her reading the pages. Along with the pages, there are some questions that you're going to answer as she's reading so that you can reflect on what you're learning. The first question is, what does the author mean by pond life begins with energy from the sun? I really recommend reading the questions before listening to the recordings just so that you know what to be listening for as you're listening to the book, okay? So after you finish listening to that first recording and answering that question, you're then going to click on pages 10 through 15 and listen to those pages as well. Here we have some vocabulary terms. I would really recommend writing these down in your journal wherever you keep your list of vocabulary terms, because this is going to be very helpful for you as you're studying when it comes time to do either the final project or our final assessment. So we have the terms habitat, ecosystem, and environment. A habitat is a home for living things where they can find everything they need to live, including food and shelter. An ecosystem is a unit of nature that includes all the relationships between plants, animals, and the place they live. And an environment is the place around us, often meaning the natural world. So one thing to reflect on is, how are those three terms different from each other? What do they have in common and how are they different? That's something to keep in mind as you're writing those down. After you've written down your vocabulary, you're going to listen to the final pages of What About Change and answer this final thought. It says, describe a healthy change in the ecosystem and an unhealthy change. So think about what Mrs. Grainier read to you, what changes were made, and how did they affect the ecosystem in either a positive or a negative way. Once you have finished listening to those recordings and answering those questions, then you're going to practice working with that simulator. So what I want you to do is pause my video right now, go ahead and listen to those recordings of What About Change, answer those reflection questions, and then come back to me. Okay, so go ahead and pause that video right now. Okay, welcome back. So hopefully you have paused the video and you've listened to the recordings of What About Change, answered those reflection questions, and now you have a little bit of background information that is going to help you play around with the simulator and answer the discussion questions that go along with it. So we have two missions today. We are going to explore what happens when two species are competing for the same limited resources in an ecosystem. So have you ever been, let's say, at a soccer game, okay? You're playing in a soccer game and both teams are fighting to score a goal. and only one team can score the goal at once. So you're both fighting for the ball, you're both trying to get the ball, you're both trying to score a goal, and you have to really think about how you can strategically get that ball in the net in order to win for your team. Now, this is a similar situation in that we have two species that are competing for the same goal. Their goal, however, is not to score a goal in soccer, it is to survive. So these two plants are trying to survive to the best of their ability. But like there is only one soccer ball, there may only be some limited resources in their ecosystem. There may be limited sunlight exposure, there may be limited water, there may be limited nutrients in the soil, and they're competing to have all of those resources and to thrive. So our first mission is we are going to use the simulator to see how we can get two plants to happily coexist in an ecosystem. First things first, we are going to practice using just plants in our ecosystem, just producers, and we're going to see how they interact. So it says try to get two plants to happily coexist, meaning to live well together in an ecosystem. In any given ecosystem, most organisms will carve out a niche for themselves where they can obtain all the necessities to survive. So they'll find this specific environment, this specific ecosystem with everything that they need in order to thrive. Often, different species within the ecosystem will compete for the resources that a niche provides. However, certain species live well together, symbiotically, parasitically, or by staying out of each other's way. And these are relationships that we talked about in some of our previous lessons. So for example, lichen and moss, which are two producers, are often the primary colonizers of a new ecosystem. And they tend to live fairly harmoniously in each other's vicinity, meaning that they live well with each other. They can live close together without having any issues. So we're going to play around with this ecosystem simulator, or ecology lab is what it's called. And we are going to see what happens when we have two plants that are competing for the same limited resources. We're going to go back to the assignment and click on Ecology Lab. This is a simulator, meaning that this is a representation of an ecosystem. On the left, you'll see that there are some tools that you can play around with. Here we have the plants that are available in this ecosystem, some herbivores, some omnivores, and a top predator. At the very top, you'll see reset, pause, step, and run. These are the tools you will use in order to start the simulator, in order to reset it as well. Over here is the representation of the ecosystem. If you turn everything off, you will see that it says just bare ground. This is just soil. Then you're going to add plants A and plant B. It should already have that open. If it doesn't, you'll click on plant A and plant B to add them. You can see that it shows about 50-50. There's some lime green plant A and some teal green plant B. It looks like it's about half and half in this ecosystem. We are going to see what happens after 100 days when these plants are living in the same niche and trying to compete for those resources. What you're going to do is open up the data chart. You will see that the first step is to make a prediction about what the ending population will be when plant A and plant B are competing for the same resources. Then you're going to find out what the actual ending population is. So after you've made your prediction, using what you know, think about what might happen if these two plants are competing. Do you think that one will be more dominant? Do you think that they'll live harmoniously and have no problems? This is where you're going to make your prediction. What do you think the ending population will be for plant A or for plant B at the end of the 100 days after the simulator is run? Then once you've made your prediction, you're going to go and click run, and you will see, I'll make a test sample just so you can see the line graphs that I'm talking about. Now, you will only have 2 line graphs. I didn't want to show you exactly what you're going to be doing because you're making a prediction on it. Now, as you can see, plant A, plant B, plant C, and herbivore C are all labeled. So starting at, let's use plant A for example, or plant A is right here. Day 1, we have 4,995 of plant A. If you follow that line, it'll tell you on different days how many plant A's there are in this ecosystem. The ending population is going to be at day 100, so the simulator ends at day 100. You're going to go to day 100 and record the population of plant A. Now remember, this is just my example. You are only using plants A and B in your simulator, and you're going to run it with just those two. So you should only have 2 lines down here. After you've recorded the ending population, you're going to answer this question. Did you find one of the producers to be dominant? If so, which one was dominant, and why do you think that this happened? Think about what you heard in What About Change, the recording of the book. Then your second mission, which you will see in your slides, is going to be to introduce an herbivore into the environment. So we're adding in a primary consumer. In theory, an herbivore native to the ecosystem should feed primarily on the dominant species. So if we have an herbivore that naturally lives in an ecosystem, they are going to feed on that dominant species or that dominant plant. In this system, the herbivore may consume enough of that species, that dominant species, to give the non-dominant species a chance for proliferation and survival, meaning that herbivore may eat some of that dominant plant, giving the other plant a chance to regrow and to survive more easily. What you're going to do is click on herbivore A at this point and choose Eats Plant A. So we're adding a rabbit to our environment, to our ecosystem. And we are going to see what happens to the plant population after we've added a rabbit. Now, this goes along with the balance of an ecosystem. You will find that with plants just A and B, you will see whether that ecosystem can be balanced or not. Then, once we add in an herbivore, you're going to ask yourself, do I think that this ecosystem is going to be more balanced or less balanced now that an herbivore is introduced into this ecosystem? So you're going to predict on your data chart what you think the ending population will be for plant A, plant B, and the rabbit as well. One thing to keep in mind is if you realized that one of these plants were dominant in the first part, remember that the herbivore is going to be eating that dominant plant in this habitat. So that one is most likely to be reduced. That's something to keep in mind when you're making your predictions for the ending populations. Once you have added, let's go back to the simulator, what you're going to do, click on the rabbit, click Eats Plant A. Now you can see that there are some rabbits in your ecosystem. And once you click Run, you will be able to find the ending population and see what happens once those herbivores are added to the ecosystem. Finally, you're going to answer some questions. What happens when an herbivore is added to the ecosystem? Does adding the herbivore establish a more equal field? And why does this happen? So does that herbivore make this system more balanced? Does it make the chances of survival easier for both of those plants? Or does it make it harder? Our final discussion question relates back to our final slide, which says when the ecosystem contains plants only, one species of plant outcompetes the others and takes over. This illustrates the competitive exclusion principle, which theorizes that no two species can occupy the same niche at the same time in a particular locale if resources are limited. The presence of a consumer is needed to keep that plant in check and allow the other species to survive. So what this theory is saying is that we cannot have two plants that need the same resources in the same spot without having a consumer to balance that ecosystem out. The primary colonizers of an ecosystem, the producers, are also the harbingers of primary succession. As these pioneer plants die and decay, they add organic material to the soil, which over time will allow for secondary succession, generally larger and more delicate producers such as trees. So bearing that in mind, you're going to answer this final question. From what you have learned in the text and the videos, how are humans contributing to the creation of a vastly rapid form of succession? In other words, how are we speeding up the effects of the competitive exclusion principle and thereby altering the outcome of that ecosystem's natural succession? Those are some big words. Essentially what we're asking is thinking about how different species affect environments and what you read in What About Change. How are humans impacting these ecosystems and speeding up this competitiveness? Okay? All right, once you've done that, you are all set. Let us know if you have any questions.